Thank you very much to coming here, and thank you very much to talk.
Thank you for having this conversation with me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, not so nervous, okay? And so I'm sorry, it's, my English very poor, so I speak in Japanese from now. まず彼の仕事から、so please introduce yourself, your work.
Right. Well, I do many different kinds of things. I do drawings. I make installations. I make performances. But a lot of what I do has to do with my training and me sort of trying to deal with the sort of what it means for me to be trained in a particular way. So my training is in classical music. I was trained as a composer. And so I think classical music training gives you a very specific worldview. It structures history in a very specific way. And it makes these divisions sort of between what is known as world music, which is basically everybody else, and sort of the canonic classical music. I think a lot of the work that I do has to do with me trying to process these different, structures that my training has given me. I think in a nutshell, that's what I do, but often they manifest in many different forms. Sometimes they are notational based drawings, like I would appropriate signs and symbols of traditional musical notation, and I would use them to my own purpose and repurpose them to, for example, describe military strategies. I did one such work. And in other times, I use musical notation to make sort of soundscape drawings. So I would do landscape art, but they would be essentially drawings of not what you see, but what you're hearing in a landscape. But sort of when I do that, I appropriate signs of musical notation. Other times, I would take very canonical pieces in the classical repertory, say music by Bach or Beethoven, Mozart, these very canonic European composers, and I would again repurpose them. So I did this one piece called the Coffee Cantata, where I imagined a sort of fictional readaptation of J.S. Bach's Coffee Cantata, and then we staged it and made like an MTV of the piece in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, on a piece of land that I actually own, because my dad bought a piece of land under my name. It's a really long story. I mean, at the end of the 80s and 90s, in the heyday of the economic miracle, people from Hong Kong sort of brought properties in the strangest places, and my dad bought a piece of land, a very small piece of land actually, for very cheap under my name without my knowledge. And then I found out about this, and so I shuttled the whole film crew over to New Mexico and shot this MTV of like my imagination of the Coffee Cantata. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I do and the kind of stories that I'm interested in. And I guess, I also have to say that I'm very happy to be having a conversation with you, because I'm such a big fan of your work. I think there's something that I find very curious about your work, which is very different to my own, but I guess the visual symbolism and the main concerns in your work, they remain pretty consistent. I mean, even although you were sort of in your early days, you were doing performances, and now you are doing sort of you're making these digital counter sculptures. The main concern has remained pretty consistent. Whereas the things that I do are kind of everywhere. I mean, if you look at like the things that like the different works that I do, they almost look like they don't belong to the work of the same artist. And I always find people who are able to maintain this like level of consistency to be very interesting. It is not something that I guess I have access to. I mean, is that like a conscious effort on your part to be so focused on the three fundamental concepts that you so often talk about?
Thank you very much. なんか、作品で動画というか音が聞こえるものっていうのはありますか？
Not necessarily. I mean, I think my training in music gives me a very particular way of processing the world. So I tend to hear things and I tend to process musical information. I think it's kind of like this. I can't remember who said this, but somebody once said that if the only things that you have in your toolbox are nails, then you tend to try to encounter every problem with the hammer. So I think it's something that I have, and it's the thing that I know best. And so I tend to see things through the sense of hearing and through musical signs and symbols. Yeah.
ということはとてもコンセプチュアルなんですね。So it seems to your work is like a conceptual work, right?
Are they conceptual? I think yeah, they are conceptual. Maybe they're quite political even. I mean, I think a lot about sort of problems of my training, and I also think a lot about sort of what it means for, say, for example, a composer from Asia to be writing an opera or to be writing a symphony, yeah, and what is the price of admission, as it were, to be making these pieces and to be having conversations with these pre-existing categories and genres. So on that level, I guess, like on a more meta level, it's conceptual in that way, I guess. Yeah.
とても面白い
I think this is a very interesting thing because you use a lot of technology. So is how this your some of the feeling or dialogue, and you are very put a lot of base on that. I think it's something very interesting, which you spend a lot of focus on that part.
Right. I do use technology, but I think maybe this is the way I see it. I think music has always had a very close relationship to technology. I mean, if you think about it, musicians are always the first to adopt new advances in technology. Think about how the piano has evolved as an instrument and how it, comes industrialization, comes the ability to manufacture big sort of metal frames, and how the piano's volume and dynamic has increased because of that advancement. And it continues today. I mean, musicians are always, this is a bit of a problem for musicians actually. We spend so much money just purchasing new sound gear, and it's very seductive. It's difficult to keep yourself from wanting to buy these new technology. But of course, then you make music out of it. It's not because you won't make an album because you want to show off this latest synthesizer that you had just purchased. So I think that's also how I think about my relationship with these tools as well. And again, because I don't really have any science and engineering background in my learning, So a lot of what I do with technology is self-taught. It would be difficult to replicate that knowledge or to try to teach others how to do it, but I sort of have enough knowledge to do what I need to do. Were you self-taught as a hacker, sort of like when you first started making LED counter works and soldering and sort of circuits? Where did you learn that from?
Well, for me, I learned oil painting. I have nothing with technology at all. Therefore, I have an image, so I want to do something like this. So I have to go study for it, and then I will try, and then I will try to build that. So for now, I will ask some specialists to do that part for me.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of actually the reverse of how I guess how I started using, say, the computer or programming. I actually started out collaborating with people. I was in an artist collective. And in the artist collective, there was a new media artist who was really good with programming. Actually, went to school to do math, and then there was a poet. And then the three of us would like switch roles. Like in one work, I'll be like the musician, and then in the other work, I'll be the poet. And we kind of don't really think much about it. And then so that's how we started collaborating. And then I went to graduate school, and I moved away from where I was living. And I lost my working partners, and so it just became easier, like for me to actually learn how to do programming myself, and learn how to make video or all these things myself, and I started just taking that up. I guess but it's very tiring having to always learn new tools when you want to make something that involves technology. But I guess it's different now. I mean, when you first started making works with LED counters, there weren't really like tutorials on the internet that you could just look at and pick up and sort of try to work it out at home. Whereas these days, I'm thinking about sort of the artists of our generation, and also maybe the students that you teach. It almost becomes a demand for an artist to have. Now that you have access to these tools and these tutorials, it almost becomes a demand for an artist to sort of know and sort of try to do these things themselves. Do you agree, or do you see that in the new like the younger generation of artists?
So for technology and media art is something you always people will say. A lot of people ask me why I would use a lot of technology, or why I will use the media as a new element. But for oil painters, why do you use oil? Why do you, when portraits, why do you use clay? This is the same question. But this is not a real question, but people will think it kind of odd. So in technology for oil painting and clay, they are using the same material. They are using this, you think of this material, one kind of material. So when the year change, when they have new material, so the new artists, they will use new materials. This is very reasonable. That is the new world we are facing. And the only problem is in technology, whether we are over-rely on it or we are using the technology. We are used by the technology or we are using the technology. This is very important. So there is a lot of very beautiful visual creation, but there is no heart, no concept within that creation. Whether you are only having the very surface of the creation, there is supposed to be a philosophy deep inside the creation. This is, I think, is more important.
Right. There is a question that, actually two that I know you don't want this to be too formal, but there are actually two questions that I really want to ask you. One is a question about sort of the visual symbolism in the work, and again we talked about the LED counter, and I think the visual symbolism in your work, the numbers and the LED counter, for me they suggest almost a techno utopianism. But on the other hand, I mean, without orientalizing, and I think you do agree with this as well, I think that at the core, there is something that is culturally quite specific about your work. So, I mean, who do you, and this is something I guess I sometimes I ask myself as well, I mean, who do you imagine that you are speaking to when you are making work? I guess I am speaking more specifically about culture and the context of the work.
Basically, personally, I have some of the creation is based on the Buddhism. So for Buddhism and even with the French religions, and then I will kind of combine the two together. So I was thinking that is why as a human, how we are going to live. Which way we should be moving. So this is the theme. So even though I am using technology, but still is something from the very traditional what is an art. So this is how I make my creations, how I make my art. Maybe an example. So for a life and death. So this is in Buddhism. This is a circle. When you were born and then you go die and then it repeats. This is your eternity of life. So it's eternity of life. So I want to present this concept by my LED counter.
And so on the point of LED counters and numbers, I think there's something interesting about numbers, and I guess there's a parallel with music in that. I mean, clearly we can't see, hear, taste, or touch numbers. I mean, in the same way that we can't really. I mean, sound and music is not something that is tangible. They exist in our imagination. Yet, I mean, you can do real things with them, right? I mean, you can manipulate numbers, you can amplify them, you can compare them and verify them. And in an interview that you did, you mentioned that. You think that we oscillate between the abstract and the figurative when we're dealing with numbers, and I find that comment to be very interesting. Could you elaborate on that comment that you made in the interview?
Well, I'm using 1 to 9 as a countdown. So from 9 to 1. So they coming one by one. So I use some symbol. Yes, it is one is life. I don't represent zero. This is death. So, but between life and death, they are repeating, keep on circulating. This is a life cycle. So there is a difference in different speed. They each of them have a different counting speed. So this is one person's life and his personality. So this is what I'm thinking. With a lot of different personality and a lot of people together, so they made a world, or they built their own universal. So this is I want to represent in my creation. So even for the time order in Hong Kong, I presented to the audience. So because Hong Kong is a very analogous, they have a lot of energy, fertilizing place. So I want to people to think about it, and I want to think about it, and I really looking forward for the audience reactions. So maybe in a different speed with a different personality of people, and people will keep on continue to move, and everybody is living, and they will think of what is my life? I think this is something I hope they will consider about after looking at my creations.
You know, I love this moment, like when we are like sort of waiting for the translation to finish, and then we are like sort of, and then I'm just like listening to silence like through the headphone. It's really wonderful. Okay, so about numbers, I have another question. I guess this is a comment, like sort of how I think of your work. Like, so you talk about sort of when you're seeing numbers, you like I guess it's an internal thing. You think about sort of you become really reflective, self-reflective, and you look inward. So for me, the numbers in your work is sort of, I guess how Plato talks about numbers, right? How like numbers is a sort of like it's almost a sort of aspiration, even like it's a potential for something to happen. In the same way that things like concepts like, I don't know, justice and goodness, like these things are like things that we cannot, like they don't really exist in the physical form, but they are things that we could aspire to and ascribe to. And I think that connects very nicely to how I see sort of the socially engaged and the political aspect of some of the work that you do. Would you agree with that reading?
As an artist, so we cannot live away from the world. So we have to, when we're seeing something terrifying, we got a kind of hard feeling, a hurt feeling. So for an artist, when we are looking live, this is a miracle, and it's very important. As well as there is a lot of disaster, whether we can prevent it or whether when we see that, and I hope people will have that feeling when they see the creation. So hopefully they will, through this artwork, they can cross over the wall of a lot of issues. So hopefully this can be spread in the world, and hopefully we can build a more peaceful and harmony world. So for myself, this is my purpose to make my work. This is a very important part for me. So there is every creation I'm making, I have that wish inside it.
Well, I guess one thing that you did, which really stuck out for me, is this initiative of yours, which started in 2005, the Artists Summit in Kyoto. I guess it connects to what we were just talking about just now, which is an international conference of artists. And I'm reading the description here. 7 top visual artists were invited to discuss possible solution to global concerns.
Artist Summit ね。
Yes, yeah. Can you tell us about that conference, its goals and the original impulse for the event, and sort of what did you learn from that experience? I mean, there were some very good artists in those conferences. But yeah, what did you learn in that event?
Well, basically, artists have a lot of ideas, and for innovation ideas, as also they have very different thinking. They will meet people with very different things, very different thoughts. So when there's a lot of all these great people together, and where we can start a conversation how this world can be better. This is the conversation. That's the purpose. So whether we know none of us will know what we can do, whether it's good. But when we are together, we have a very warm atmosphere, and we can feel the world can be better. For example, maybe you know, art here and art in the art market. It's a world of competition. Even as artists, they compete with each other. But for these kind of exhibitions, so they present the work, but they're still kind of competing with each other. But on the conference, there's no exhibition. There's no one showing their work. Only the artists speaking of their thoughts and their ideas, exchanging their thoughts and ideas. And we become very close. And each of us, we share our thoughts with one another. And for this world, we really have to think deeply what we can do, maybe for food and for wars and for a population, and something very concrete that we are talking about. It was a very interesting time. If those artists, they became one of the person in the UN, I think we can make a much better world now. I really think so.
Yeah, following on from that, I think you. I also read that you. I mean, one of the original sort of impulse for that conference is your view that today art, and here I'm reading a quotation, today artists find themselves in unprecedented positions of influence. I mean, well, could you elaborate on the nature of that influence? I mean, what do you think? Like, who are we really? Whose mind are we changing, and how do artists really exert that influence in your mind?
Maybe this is something quite difficult to explain. Maybe I need to change of the visuals, because the audience may get very bored looking at the same picture.
Maybe the audience very upset to the same images. Yeah, okay. Do you have any movies?
You want something funny? Or like...
Yes,
oh,
yes. No.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. We're obviously improvising. This is really fun.
Sending artists on a journey of creative discovery. Like a mobile studio, artists can be taken almost anywhere in the world to forge new perspectives and create new work. An initiative of BMW and Art Basel, this is the BMW Art Journey. Its first recipient is the sound artist, Samson Young. Bells like songs put us in the midst of things. First they ring, then they resonate. The sound decays slowly in the air.
Well, I was going, like, as part of the Art Journey project, I was going around the world to record bells of sounds that has to do with like conflicts. So this project is this is not this is the research for the art project. So the project is called For Whom the research is called For Whom the Bell Tolls, and it looks at, I guess, the relationship between bells and conflicts. Historically, there's always been a very close relationship between bells and warfare. Say, for example, cannons and bells are made of essentially the same material, and so you would melt bells to create weapons, and vice versa. When the surplus weapon after a warfare, they would be remade into bells. And if you think about it, before industrialization, there were sort of two classes of objects that could produce a sound that is louder than the sound of natural disasters, and naturally occurring phenomena, and which are cannons and bells. So I thought about that a little bit, and then I decided to make a trip that is about sort of, looking into the history of conflict through the sound of bells. So this journey covered some 11 different countries, and some of the more interesting bells that are recorded included there was this one bell which in Kenya, in Mombasa, which was a bell that warned local people of the approach of slave traders during the heyday of the East African slave trade. And so this bell, like when the slave traders were approaching the port, the bell would ring and to warn the local people of the approach of slave traders. So they would go high, and they would go either high in their home or they would run into churches. And then, for example, another bell. In this bell that you're looking at in the picture, it's a bell. It's an index card of a bell that is now in the German National Archive, and there was a whole bunch of bells that were confiscated before the Second World War because Nazi Germany calculated sort of the amount of metal that they would require to last them through the war. And so they confiscated church bells from all over Germany as well as the annexed territories. And so, but after the war, the remaining bells became a real problem for the government because they were essentially warlords, right? And there was a court ruling shortly after the war that basically dictated that these bells, they would become German national property. So a lot of these bells from, for example, Poland were never returned, and they were just kind of randomly given to churches in Germany. But one such bell actually changed hand and went back to Poland in 2005. So I tracked it down, and I recorded the sound of it, interviewed the people who were involved in the transaction. But it doesn't really directly generate a work, I guess. Like these are research that I accumulate, recordings, interview, pictures, And then when I have to make a work, then I draw upon these material, and that's kind of quite typical of how I do work. Like I do field work and I do field research, and then I accumulate materials, and then at some point they would become artworks when the circumstances and the opportunity arises. I'll then make something out of them. So what you see is in the YouTube video is actually a trailer of the Art Journey team. They follow me to France, and they also went with me to Morocco, and they sort of made a very short documentary of how I was recording the sound. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, I can see the ICC tower from my home actually.
Correct. This is this is a time waterfall. Yeah. So every number is a different counts, and so different size. It means different character. Yeah.
And how do you decide on the speed of the countdown?
It's a good question, but so no, this is a no control from me. So it's just a program. So by the computer. So it's like a very natural random system.
It's very musical. Like I always think of the different sort of speed of counting in your work as very musical. Like they're very contrapuntal to me, like the sort of like counterpoint in music, like parallel timelines going. On at the same time.
I like a very natural rhythm. So after the 2011, because the earthquake in Japan. After that, my mentality is a change. So it's like a more flexible, more like natural things, because we cannot control for the nature. We cannot control for that, and so art also cannot control for that. That's why I choosing the system of the very natural random system. So it's like very natural, like a rain falling down, or some flowers falling down, like that. So I'm choosing this system, and so the number falling down like waterfall. Yeah, that's why totally random. So I cannot control this numbers and the system and design, you know. So it's very natural. Yeah. Okay.
Shall we open the floor for like shall we take some questions from the floor, do you think?
Yes. Yes, on time. Please.
Does anybody have any question?
Yes.
Samson, can you tell me a bit more about how? Sorry. Yeah, I will. Hi. Thanks, both. Samson, can you just say a bit more about how the work you've made, the journey will actually take place, the walk element of it, this week, and how it might relate or not to Tatsuo's piece?
Right. So the work, it's a sort of a sound walk, a multimedia sound walk. It takes people from the convention center on a journey to the Tenma Park, which is actually not so far from here. It's about 15 minutes from here. by just walking, but when you're sort of listening to a soundtrack and watching a film while you're doing that, it takes about 45 minutes. The materials from the walk, some of them were gathered at this journey. So the bell sound that I recorded, there were some interviews that I'm also using in the walk, but the walk itself is not let's say a conclusion of the journey of the whole research, because the research really is rather big. It's really about this large idea, and I don't think I could do it any justice at all to sort of boil it down to like one work, and I would probably generate many different works with this body of research. But this multimedia walk is my attempt at sort of thinking about what it means to have taken a journey. So it actually is more focused on the idea of a journey, and it has something to do with it's quite personal in a sense that it also has to do with the social movements in Hong Kong in recent years, and sort of thinking about that in terms of a journey also. So actually, what you will see in the work is that you'll be watching a film, and you'll be listening to the instruction, and you'll be walking along but on your own, and there will be some live performance, some minimal live performance element as well. But people are basically walking and taking this journey on their own, and so that's the idea behind the walk, which is happening tomorrow. Yeah.
Hi, I saw the Tatsuo Miyajima's waterfall last night, and like I don't know if you had intended, but it was I saw it from the central side. So if I watched the tower, like I couldn't see that top part where the number starts to fall. So I was like kind of seeing in the bottom. Like, were you like, I don't think, did you intended that, or what do you think about it? Like, did it kind of like, do you think that whether it distorted the meaning of the work? What is your opinion on that?
Well, because I want something is like things fall from the universe. They kind of come to the earth. So for ICC Tower is right in the middle. So this is a part of the intersection. So this is something that fall from the sky and kind of land in between. So yesterday and today is kind of foggy, and no one can see the top of the ICC. It's like fall into from the sky, from the clouds. So this is my original idea actually. So this is from space, part of the space. So kind of I feel like the top of the ICC is like as part of the space. This is my basic first idea.
Hi, I have a question for both of you. First, Samson, thanks for showing us your work. Just now you mentioned about your work is part of a bigger research. Can you tell us more about your research? Or, I think more interestingly, I would like to understand what motivated you to be doing these projects. I'm sure something is within you that kind of pushes you to create these kind of work. So I'm just curious to know about that. And my question to Tatsuo is that you mentioned about how artists came together and discussed global concerns. And just now, you also mentioned about how your work is related to, I would imagine, your beliefs, in Buddhism, or about life and death. is that something that is driving you to create your work? I mean, I'm just curious to know that as an artist, I mean, is your primary concern is that through your work you can, I don't know, create a better world, make the world a better place? I mean, can you share with us something more about that thought?
I think the art for the people. Art not for the art's sake. So that's the point. And I would like to the presenting my human spirit by the art. So there is so many artwork has a very beauty surface and lots of material, lots of that, but very few work has a conceptual spirit for the people. Very few work behind the background, the philosophy. So I would like to create like that. So for the people, for the world. You understand? Thank you.
And my interest in bells and conflict actually came quite organically from my last project, which was looking at the sound of explosions of weapons. And I'm interested in the sound of explosion of weapons because I'm interested in sounds that are very dense, that has a really high density, which means that at the moment of hearing it, you can't process all the information that is coming through you. So your ear can't help but drop information. So it's kind of an information overload. And it's very similar to how, say, our eye get used to, say, really bright lights, for example, like the camera flashlight, and then it leaves like an imprint on your retina. And of course, now that we have the computer, we can go back to those moments and look at exactly what is sort of all the different components in the sound. But before we had recording technology and computer to analyze the sound, we were dropping information. And so I guess it started with that impulse. And also I've always been interested in sort of how sound has been used in warfare historically. In the most primitive way, sort of drumming is a kind of psychological warfare where you're trying to use the volume of sound to scare or to intimidate the enemy into submission, right? So I think there is a very long history and historical association between sound and warfare, and that interests me again naturally because because I'm trained as a musician, and sort of I guess it connects with the question that you asked Tatsuo as well, because I'm also kind of interested in the artist's role in these larger questions. But for me, it's very self-reflective. It's rather me trying to find a place like where I belong, rather than trying to sway opinion one way or another, but rather thinking about sort of where I belong politically, where I belong sort of culturally, how do people continue to stage resistance and these sort of things, but it's sort of quite inward, I guess, these questions that I ask.
Hi, thank you both for this conversation. I just wanted to ask you about a little bit more about your relationship to new media with each of your works, and your relationship to the process of new media. So my question is how much of these algorithms and programs are you setting up to allow the work to build and evolve on a technological plane, if that makes sense? And I'm just interested in how that process of working is informing the concepts of your work.
じゃあまず僕の方から。So,
Maybe I should start. For the person I have specialists to do the programming, so I will have my have a concept, I have a thinking, and I will explain to him. So I just basically ignore the limitation of technology.
I don't care about the limited of the technology. My priority is just a concept, just an image of myself. So I said that. So the programmer climbing up and brush up to the technology more than before. It's a very good combination for the technology and the art.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then unfortunately we have to draw this conversation to a close.
Maybe Samson, would you like to answer the previous question before I go?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think, first of all, I try to do the things that I can do, that I know how to do. And so there is definitely a certain limitation there. But I think with, when I was talking about musicians, traditionally musicians' relationship to technological development and advancement, I'm also talking about these moments in technological invention when new technology come about. And these moments, they become sort of almost historic events that are not reversible. Like if you think about the recording, like tape recording, right? As soon as tape recording has been invented and when that spread, our relationship to the material of sound has been changed forever, and that moment is irreversible. And in the same way that I think about, so earlier I was talking about these information overload and explosion sound, and if you think about how sound analysis technology, sort of how you can see spectrogram of sound now, once that has arrived, that has changed our relationship with that sort of sound forever, like in a sense that we become like we are very aware of the fact that hearing in the moment is only an aspiration. We can't hear everything. So I think maybe maybe an artist is when dealing with technology is always trying to do with both of those aspects, like technology as sort of historical point of arrival that are irreversible, like historic events, as well as just actually trying to work out the program and make the circuit work, which is no different to sort of just trying to make sure that the paper is of a certain quality and that you are using sort of a certain pencil that to your liking. Yeah.
Cool. I have a question that relates to both of your work and I guess your concern with social issues and social questions. Miyajima-san, you mentioned that you had this meeting where people came together and were talking about solutions to world problems and so on. And within that, there's sort of a prescriptive desire, a desire to be able to prescribe solutions to problems. But in both of your work, like in your work, Miyajima-san, it's very poetic and very and really not prescriptive in any sort of way. And in Samson, your work, it's I see it as very investigative and research oriented in some way. And neither of you are engaged in these prescriptive practices in your work. So I just wonder, between your work and these social issues and social questions, what do you see kind of bridging that space so that desire to have a deeper impact on social concerns can be either actuated or influenced in one way or another, or even if that matters. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think my approach is this. I mean, when I look into an issue, say for example, the research on bells and conflict, or earlier when I did a piece where I walked the Hong Kong-China border to gather sounds and archive sounds of the border fences that sits between Hong Kong and China. I think that's a process. The process of research is a process of trying to formulate an opinion. So these are things that I'm not sure about because I'm conflicted about sort of the various aspects of the issue. Like on the one hand, I subscribe to ideology A, and on the other hand, I feel like this is wrong, and so I'm trying to reconcile things internally. As to how that makes an impact, I think, you know, having an informed opinion and well-researched opinion is very important, because I would then go ahead and exert sort of my influence by being engaged in social activism, by running my nonprofit in a particular way, by voting in a particular way, and all of that is informed by sort of my opinion on the subject matter. And so that's why I said, I think when I'm dealing with these issues, I'm always looking inward in trying to like really figure out what I think about this in a way that isn't just borrowing from somebody's sort of like prefabricated opinion on the subject. I hope I answered your question there. Yeah.
So it's very simple. Art, not explanation for the social issue. Art is understanding everyone to catch up all things. So that's why, so if the artwork not interesting and not poetic and not beauty, nobody to see it. So that's why I make artwork very poetic and very beauty, and it's very important things. But behind the background philosophy and social issue, it's more important. So it's a balance for that. Thank you.